Kim, you can see who's on. You, Kim, can you see who's on? Can't. I'm sorry?
All right, let me sing. Oh, Rich is here.
Here comes Rich.
Uh-oh.
Kim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Rich?
Okay, so my audio isn't working on my laptop, so I'm actually calling in by phone.
Okay.
You can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay.
That's Jacob, isn't it? I can't really tell.
Yes.
That's Jacob.
Okay, I think we are assembled. So expecting everybody's time and effort here. The meeting
Sorry.
today will be divided generally into two segments. First segment are some action items we need to deal with, basically principally signing up some of our advisors that we need to deal with the financial aspects of it. And then the second part will be, we're going to review some of the tools that we're going to be using to keep track of how much money we're spending here and the schedule by which we're going to be spending it. We're not going to act on those things. You're not here for action, and there's a lot of more input to be gathered to keep with them. But I think it's important that the board get an understanding here of the totality of this thing and how it's going to function and what's going to be important. Some of you are familiar with these tools, some of you are not. So this is the start today. So with that in mind, we'll go to the first action item, which are the minutes of the previous meeting of November 13th. Are there any comments or questions about them? Seeing or hearing none, then I'll entertain a motion for their approval. We have had a motion.
So
And second.
Second.
Any further questions or comments? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? They're carried. Okay, requisition number 6, pay requisition.
Yeah.
Kim?
Okay, so yeah, pay requisitions for December. We have a payment to 100 Carlson Road LLC for $5,976.43. Bond Shomek and King for $20,714. Savin Engineers for $173,694.49. And lastly, Watts Architecture and Engineering for $10,496.58. Total payments $210,881.50. Any questions? Okay, if not, I'll move to the board for full approval.
We've had a motion for the approval of the requisitions.
I'll move it.
It's been seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? And so that takes us to the first of the items that, the contractual items that we're talking about. The first of those is the independent compliance officer. Remember, we went through a process by which we reviewed the selection of the of this Anshin. That was approved by the board. We are now at the point where the contract has been negotiated in its terms, and those contracts were sent to all the members of the board in advance of the meeting. And you are now acting to approve the final contract. We had a memo from our attorneys who spent most of the time with respect to this, that accompanied these three documents, these three contracts, one of which was this one. So at this point, I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments you might have about it. Seeing or hearing none, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the agreement as submitted.
So moved.
It's been seconded.
Second.
Any further questions or comments? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 None. It'll carry. Thank you, gentlemen. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
The next one on our list here is for the financial advisor services contract. Again, that was discussed in the memo. This is the same group that we've used in the past. They have developed a specific expertise with respect to this particular kind of transaction. It is, of course, unique. And so it's important that we take advantage of that. Also, they are the group that provides similar services to the city. That's important that we be lined up because they have experience with the city and particularly with respect to the first of the financial transaction, which is the bond anticipation notes. Those use city credit. And so it's important that we all be on the same page with respect to it. Again, that agreement was had been negotiated. It's been circulated with respect to the group of materials that we sent you for the meeting. The price we've checked on various locations around, including some other places in the state, to make sure that these numbers are about right. And of course, the city is regularly using these people and has some experience with it as well. Okay, questions or comments on this particular agreement? Seeing or hearing none, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the agreement.
I'll move it.
So moved.
And seconded.
Second.
Any further questions or comments? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? It carries. Okay, that gets us to the next item on here, which is the underwriting services contract award. The same argument applies there. It applies with respect to the financial advisor. This particular group works with the city, so we have some commonality here that's important. And also we has experience with these particular types of transactions we're doing here. Remember, this is where the magic comes in. It's very important that this process that we go through here in the next 4 or 5 months follow this thing through in an experienced pattern, because it's how we raise the money. We're trying to raise the money through these bonds, and we're not impacting ultimately the city credit, which is also important. So the experience people have with respect to this type of transaction is vital to us. Okay, other questions or comments about this particular transaction? Hearing or seeing none, then I'll entertain a motion to approve it as it's submitted.
So moved.
Been moved by Kim. Second. Been seconded by Jesse. Questions or comments? Hearing or seeing none, then all those in favor say aye.
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 Hearing none opposed, It'll stand approved as submitted. And the final item here is the approval of terms by which we use our the general counsel for the board. Again, we're relying on them here for their experience with respect to this matter and already having paid for the learning curve here. This is the terms under which we use the attorneys. They're not a commitment to use them. We're not obligated to spend any money with them at all or spend money with them alone. But when we do use them, these are the terms under which we'd be governed. So it gives us some protection in that circumstance. And of course, gives them some as well. So any questions about this?
No.
Okay, hearing or seeing none, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the retention letter.
So
So
moved.
moved.
It's been moved and
I'll
seconded.
second it.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. It passes. And that takes care of our various agreements. It's important for us to have gotten this behind us because we've got to get going on this part of it. There's a lot of work to be done, preliminary work to be done to get to the financing. And we need these people in place to do it. So it's important. That gets us then to the non-action items, the discussion items, the first of which is the fund balance report. And Kim Mitchell, are you going to lead us through that?
Sure, thank you, Chairman Richards. The overall fund balance after the last meeting. East High School had $5 of unused canon allowance. After the payments were deducted from November, district-wide technology 2B, there remained $4,485,332. For school 4 had a balance of $18,023. The settlement and the Attorney General Settlement Fund has $330,648. The CPL fund has $205,421. And the Canon Settlement Fund has $200,000, with a total of $5,239,924. The RCSD Loan Fund had a balance of $544,947. This current pay requisition has $5,976.43 being paid to 100 Carlson Road, $20,714 to Bond Shonik and King, $173,694.49 to Savin Engineers, $10,496.58 to Watts Architecture, for a total this pay requisition of $210,881.50. Once those balances are deducted, that leaves $330,648 in the RJSCB fund balance, $4,503,855 in the program bond funds, $405,421 in the settlement funds balance. Combined, those totals are $5,239,924. And the RCSD loan balance has $334,065.
So from the point of view of the board, just to refresh everybody's recollection, the monies here that are available to us are the bookends of this chart at the bottom. The one item, the fund balance on the left-hand side, is the money that we received as a result of the settlement in phase 1 through the Attorney General's office. And so that's available to the board to do as it chooses with it. The loan balance at the right-hand side is the balance of the loan that's been advanced by the city. And we're going to be talking about that a little more later. The money in the center 2-3 blocks will eventually collapse into one number and will be used to pay down the debt with respect to phase 2. And also there's some miscellaneous obligations that are pending at the district that will reduce that number a little bit, but that'll be the end of phase 2. That's good news. If you, you'd like in some ways to have spent the 5 million, and we'll spend some more of it before we're finished. What you can't do is have that number be negative. It has to be within the statutory amount, and we're well within it now. Okay, questions or comments?
Mm.
Not seeing any. Then I'd like to get to the program manager's report and also to deal with some of the information that we talked about earlier. So why don't you give us your general report first, Pepin, and then we'll go into the documents we talked about.
Thank you, Chairman Richards. First of all, we really thank the board for selecting the financial advisor, the bond underwriter, as well as the ICO, a very important step indeed towards moving forward. We will be setting up a kickoff meeting with the capital market advisors and CT for this coming Thursday. We'll send the invitation to you, Chairman Richards, and also to Mrs. Jones and to Sean for the district. So we'll meet with the RJSCB leadership to plan the short-term financing process for the phase and review the requirements for sizing the bond anticipation note you just mentioned. And this band would carry us the planning process and early design work necessary to move the program along until the first tranche of the serial bonds is sold. So once we review the scope of the program and with the financing folks and the associated schedule and costs, we will start drafting the narrative of the financial plan and supporting documents that need to be reviewed by the school district, then submitted to the Office of the State Controller. For the second item.
Yeah, remember there are 2 parts to this, or 2 parts of the preparation. They actually prepare and insert into the strategic plan the financial plan. So there's this preparatory work that has to go on that gets signed off on by a number of people, not the least of which are the controller and SED. And then there's the actual doing of it, the actual going and issuing the bands or doing the bonds. And there's a certain, that follows the plan, but it has in it certain additional work that they need to do.
In terms of other activities, we are continuing our work with the Watts SWBR team on the strategic plan development. We've had a number of planning and coordination meetings with the school district and the master plan architect since last month's meeting. We continued the prioritization and strategic sequencing of the projects with the district and the master plan architect. Based on information that is currently available, we developed a full program-wide master schedule for review and discussion with the school district. We'll go through this document later, as the chairman mentioned earlier. We continued the analysis of step 1, materials prepared by Watson SWBR as the strategic planning team. In terms of the program-wide conceptual cost estimates, the fundamental question remains, what is the overall cost of the program and how much New York State will pay, right? So the program costs are being reconciled with the master plan architect using the best information and assumptions available. And those assumptions involve calculation of building aid units for each building in phase 3, also involves regional cost factors, construction cost index in effect when the general construction contract is signed, which is a few months or maybe a year down the line, maximum cost allowances, and of course the SCD commissioner approval of each of the projects. As far as the engagement of, go down to the third item. The engagement of specialty consultants, the swing space planning and early projects architect need to be selected in order to remain on schedule. And that's a discussion I've had with the Chairman Richards and our team. And also we'll have some conversations with the PLA consultant. We have a meeting scheduled with Sealer Engineering on Thursday afternoon to start that discussion. The last item is exactly what the chairman mentioned. There are 3 items he had requested on behalf of the board. It's the cash flow needs, the pre-ban cash flow needs that would carry us to June 2024. We provided a narrative of the project schedule, the schedule itself to the school district at the request of Chairman Richards. And also there's a document we reviewed with Watts and the SWBR showing the cost of the project slightly above the 475 million statutory limit, and we'll go through those documents whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's start with the overall cost estimate. You know, obviously, we're at somewhat early stages here with respect to development of this overall cost estimate, but I wanted very much to get something down on paper here so we can work against it. You know, these numbers will change. They'll change all the way through this whole project, but they'll change probably dramatically between now and when we actually do our first project. But we got to have something we're working against here, you know, so we have some sense of the totality. And so, Kim, if you put that up, which is what this is, based on the work done by Watts and by SWBR and the consultant they hired to do the costing, Trophy Point, this is the initial cost structure for the whole project and for each of the individual projects. It's not so important to focus on the particular numbers at the moment because they're going to change a little bit, but it is important for us to get some sense of the order of magnitude. And what this shows us is we're $38 million over budget already. In other words, we spent, if we were to do it just exactly like this, and assuming these numbers are correct, we're $38 million too much. That's no surprise. That almost always happens. And it's a reason to do this. So you get some scope sense of what you're coping with. And now some work is going in there and taking a hard look at the way in which some of these estimates were done. Remember, these are done on gross terms, square feet, those kinds of numbers that you might have, and see if there's things in here that we can change the estimate itself for before we start thinking about, you know, changing the project itself in some fashion. But ultimately, that number has to go away. That differential has to go away. And it has to go away in a way that we've got some leeway. In other words, we've got some float with respect to the time, and we've got some leeway with respect to the cost structure itself, because it will change as we go through the specific projects. Good news is we got it down. We got something down in front of us here. And it has some reliability. I don't want to dismiss it entirely. And one of the reasons the number's higher is that they were using current cost structure. And we all know that current construction costs have gone up dramatically. So on that number alone, you could have a number that's this high. The other sort of, in addition to the specifics of the planning, the other thing that is a little bit of a wild card right now, and that's the bidding process. One of the unique aspects right now is construction costs are high. They've been high for a while. A lot of the equipment that you put in here have lead time, so forth and so on. But the other thing is the environment in which you bid into. In other words, is there sufficient competition here to keep the prices close to the structure cost we're talking about? The answer to that is probably no. But it's certainly a risk. And that's in addition to the basic cost structure that you're dealing with here. But, you know, so be it, right? That's what we have to deal with. That's what we will deal with as we go through the process. The other reason for having something this large and beginning to use this as a basic planning document is we don't want to get in a situation where we spend all our money in the first two projects. You know, we're gonna have to make some decisions here about making sure we can spread this money over the entire course of the project. And so that we can help the district make decisions about what's most important to them and what it is they want to do. So that's the first one. Anything else about this?
Nope, you covered it all. We've escalated the current costs to midpoint of construction up to August 2027, and that's where your overage really got accelerated.
Chairman Richards, this is Ron. I have hopefully a simple question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you. I'm sorry, Ron. Go
Okay,
ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. And I see we're over about 8%, and I understood you said about the float. What is that float? Is that going to be like 10% below the 475, or is there a rough number of what we're thinking about? You know, if we're going to have a contingency, is there a contingency? I mean, is it 50, million or what? I'm just trying to, because right now we're 8% high, and you say we got to get this number down because we need some float just in case. Well, as you well know, a year or two in the project, you're going to get those cost overruns, and you want to have enough contingency in there to, cover and still be under the 475.
Right. I didn't necessarily mean that as an additional. There is some float in this now. Do you know what the number is?
Okay,
Yes,
Got
we
it.
normally carry 10% contingency.
Got
and
it. Yep.
Up to 95% of construction.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
That was essentially going to be my question as well, was did we build it? I can't see all the columns, but I did see one on there for contingency. So I'm looking at it as if we built in 15%, but we're 8% over, we have that 7.5%.
Right. Some of that is true. Yes. And it's in the individual project numbers. That's but one of the things that the bidding process will tell us is what how big a number we have to have, whether that's sufficient or not. Remember, this is a two-step process here. The first step is we've got to get the cost structure itself, total project cost structure, within the statutory limit that was granted. So that's the number that you see down here, that at the 475 million. In addition to that portion of the construction, which the state education department will allow to be reimbursed. And that number will be something different than the total here. And that's when you hear people say we need to get the local share to within the 95% of the total cost. That's that second hoop that we got to jump through here. We got to get it total has to be in that number. And then second of all, we have to be, the total number has to be 95%. That's state reimbursed. The rest of it will come from the district. So it's a double whammy here. Okay. So you're going to be seeing this more, we'll keep pounding away on this and you'll see it throughout the project, and it'll get more detailed as time goes on. Okay, let's talk, while we're talking about money here, Pepin, let's talk a little bit about the cash flow.
Let me just bring up second document.
So the other thing I asked Pepin to do, in addition to working with SWBR to get this total cost, what kind of money are we going to spend in this project over the next 6 months? 6 months, hopefully, would take us 6 months into next year when the first preliminary financing would occur. And that number will get bigger, as you will see, but it's important for us to know how that happens. Remember, there's a 3-step process for financing this. Step 1, we borrow money from the district. We've already borrowed some, we'd have to borrow more, and you'll see it. In the past, for phase 2, that total turned out to be about $5 million. Then the second thing is the band anticipation notes, which are anticipating borrowing money, anticipating the ultimate issuing of the bonds. That pays back the city, or excuse me, the district, and finances the beginning of the work. And then the third element is the bonds themselves. We'd anticipate that that the schedule for that would be in it, the bond, the loan from the district will have to be finalized sometime around the middle of January. The band anticipation notes we'd hope would be done in June of next year. And then the first tranche of the bonds aren't issued all at once. They're issued in tranches. There'd be at least 2 of them. The first one will be about $200 million, and that would be June of 25. That would pay back the city for the band anticipation notes and finance the construction of the project. Those are approximate dates. We'll talk about them in terms of the schedule before, but for the purposes of planning, we got to get our act together, and also tells us when we have to have these various approvals in place before we can do any of this. So Pepin, go ahead.
Sure. So with this document, I collected some historical information from Chairman Richards and Kim Mitchell. Just to see how the first loan from the school district was used and who was paid. So on the left, you'll see the companies that were paid from the loan proceeds. And starting from the Carlson Road all the way down to Watts in green, you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see that about 1.925 million of the loan was used will be used up to December. I'm carrying a delta of 334,065 for December. And let me just jump ahead. If you could scroll quickly to the right at the bottom, Kim, just to show more. So historically, in phase 2, Chairman Richard asked me to research what was borrowed from the school district. June 1st, 2015, the first loan was for 2.7 million. June 16, 2016, a second loan was issued for 2 million. And there was also an advance of 5.3 million that was made to the RJSCB, totaling $10 million of advance from the school district to the RJSCB to roll out the phase 2 program. On the far right at the bottom, you'll see that we've estimated expenditures to June 2024 up to about, in red, 3,075,000. And that was calculated based on estimates from what the RJSCB will spend from January to June, with each vendors listed. At the very top, if you could scroll up, you'll see the titles, yellow. So from January to June, we estimated each vendor will have an expense. For example, Bonchonek and King would probably have a $10,000 expense on average on a monthly basis, since most of the hard work was done negotiating the specialty consultants. You'll see Savin and Gilbane at the bottom, middle. I'll start with the 225, which includes several reimbursables that we are carrying for the RJSCB. For example, there are several vendors the RJSCB was paying on the first loan that Savin now will be paying. We will finance those expenses, and the RJSCB will reimburse Savin for those expenses. So that's included in the 225 for the first 2 months. We have a 5-week month in March. It went up a little bit. And then there are some other expenses such as build out to reconfigure this office to reduce footprint. That's also in some of those numbers. To fast forward, we estimate the total loan from the RCSD to the RJSCB will be about 5 million when you consider both loan number 1 and loan number 2.
Yeah, we don't need to focus specifically on the particular vendors and the how much, as much as what I asked Pepin to do is to, let's get something down on paper here that shows us what could happen. So we can plan accordingly with respect to that. We're not looking for authorization to spend any of this. That'll come to you each month as it has in the past. You just voted on it here with respect to the requisitions that Kim Jones presented. So that's the control the board has over this, authorizing individual expenditures. But given the way we're financed here, we've got to do an estimate of how much money we need in these blocks of time. And so what I asked him to do is to put down everything here that got spent before and come up with a number that would address it. And so we'll see. I hope, to tell you the truth, it would be better, as far as I'm concerned, if we actually accelerated this a little bit. In other words, if we got to the point where we could go a little faster, because we're going to want to get some of the planning, particularly architectural planning, done sooner rather than later. That'll do a couple things for us. Take some of the pain out of the schedule, which you're going to see now. And second of all, it'll start firming up these numbers, where we start dealing with the details of individual projects and get a better sense of how important or how that's going to impact these numbers. But for now, we got to start, we got a basis on which we can start, and this is it. And we'll keep updating this to make sure that we get ourselves to the point where we, have a more reliable base.
And the other document, Chairman Richard, is that flow chart for the ban that we've not circulated, but we can bring that up if you want. It kind of spells out the steps.
We have that, we can show.
Can you? Okay.
Why don't you lead them through it a little bit here?
Oh, yes. So with this one,
It looks nice, but what did it say?
I color coded some of the responsibilities, the RJSCB being the blue box, the financial advisors and Savin Gilbane in red, and black is the RCSD and the city of Rochester. So on the far left, I showed the first loan that was issued to the RJSCB from RCSD. I'll put the date at the bottom once I have the exact date. We just discussed loan number 2, which will occur sometime soon. The next event is meeting with the financial advisors, capital market advisors, Citigroup, Sean Farr, Kim Jones, to kick off the financing in a short term. The next, it would be for me to update the cash flow estimates. I've developed one already, which I shared with Chairman Richards. I will share with the financial advisors, the bond underwriter, and the RJSCB leadership this week, once I'm authorized to do so. So we plan on doing that by December 19th. I removed the dates I had earlier because I don't know when the municipal cooperative agreement will be executed between the city, school district, and the RJSCB. I'll plug that date in once it's available. Once we have our kickoff meeting, I will size the ban with the advisors. We'll conduct another analysis to make sure sensitive analysis is done properly. Once that's done, I'll knock on Mr. Perrin's door to see when we can put the legislation in front of the city on the finance committee, do the same school district. We'll revise the costs based on the information we get back from the folks on Wall Street. We'll also analyze the interest rates and what the ban will do for the board in terms of costs and premium that you're supposed to get. So once the city authorizes the ban with an ordinance, we'll schedule the closing, and the hope is to do it in June 2024 or sooner. So that's pretty much what this chart does. I'll update it for the next meeting. I can put more dates to it.
They,
So Pepin, this is this is Kim. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yep.
So I know we have a tentative June 2024 date, but I'm not so sure how realistic that is, given the fact that, we'd be in the midst of closing, our financial statements. So we may need to negotiate that date, the June 2024 date.
yeah.
But we can talk about that further, but realistically, that may not be a good date for us.
Okay, well, you're
Yep.
right, and we'll have to not only do that, but also match some of the plans the city has for financing of their own. So this is flexible in that sense, but
So I picked June 24, since that's normally the cycle for the city's own finances, but if we can certainly do something cycle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
generally we do 2 offerings a year. We have one coming up in February, and then we do another one in August. So the June date is, the end of our fiscal year. So again, we can talk about it, but I've got to kind of keep in mind, the staff that I have working on this stuff internally.
yeah, we do have some obviously we'll have to have it. We have to have some flexibility. It changes how much is in what bucket, but ultimately it
Yeah.
all gets resolved anyway. It all gets rolled up into an agreement. So, and that's what that cooperative agreement that was referred to earlier says. The essence of that is among the 3 parties here, everybody agrees this is how this works. And by that, I mean that the loan gets paid out of the band gets paid out of the bonds themselves. Not that there's any question about that, but it's pretty good. It's important to make sure you've agreed who's going to pay whom what before you loan the money. Just as a matter of sort of principle.
Great. I mean, once we meet with Rick Gansey on Thursday, Kim, we should be able to negotiate that date and come up with something that's.
Yeah.
With.
Yeah, we'll narrow it down.
Okay.
Good.
The next, you want us to pull up the schedule now?
Let's talk about the schedule.
We also,
I'm sorry, one thing. Another sort of wild card that sits on top of the cost structure here is how much it's going to cost us to finance. Phase 2 was very inexpensive. The interest rates we paid in phase 2 were less than 1% in the final period of time. That is not going to happen this time. And that has an impact on the total cost of the program, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see what the financial advisors and other people have to say about that. And that may influence the timing a little. In other words, it may be better to do it at a different time. But the numbers are stabilizing a little bit, what I hear, that it's not as threatening at the moment as it has been. U of R just financed almost the same number. And it was a number that was in a little more than 4, which is much higher than what we paid, but not some of these numbers that you've heard thrown around that, were 3 or 4 times that. So hopefully,
Yeah, the city's last issuance, we were at about 4% as well.
okay, the schedule.
we put a Gantt chart together, which I'm gonna ask Rolly Coleman to help me with. And we also put a narrative together, working with the chairman and Rick Stoffel to pretty much explain what we've done. We can either go through the narrative, Rolly, or you can just talk through the Gantt chart itself.
Well, we're going to give the narrative to the board here.
Yes.
So why don't you sort of lead us through the chart themselves?
Okay, and we certainly can come back to the narrative, any questions you have at the next meeting. But as a overview, there have been a number of work sessions the past almost month and a half. We are currently at about 300 tasks in this P6 schedule of the moment. It is a computer-based program that we're using. That will easily blossom into 3,000 to 4,000 tasks once we have projects under construction. So this will be iterative, it will change, and it is a slice in time. In those work sessions, we've tried to sketch, if you will, the expectations and the milestones that we felt the program needed to hit, and those then are validated by the actual logic that gets built into the task in terms of precursors and successors for all the various activities and the milestone dates. I think it'll be very helpful for everybody to keep in mind that phase 3 has at least 3 very, very unique attributes that distinguish it or differentiate it from the prior phases. First and foremost, the projects are actually larger by an order of magnitude, and they are much more focused on mechanical, electrical, plumbing, MEP systems infrastructure, as well as building condition survey, deferred maintenance. That's an acronym called BCS. So those are prime drivers to these projects and to the setting of the budgets and the schedule. One of the immediate implications of that is what we are seeing, and Pepin's Pulse Beat is much, much more familiar with that, with the number of projects he also is seeing in Metro New York City and Long Island. There are long lead items for which, once you get into MEP building system infrastructure, boilers, generators, switchgear, and the like, it is not unusual at the moment to be seeing, close to 2 years and some lead time. We are hoping it's going to get better than that, and thus we're not quite assuming that extensive a lead time, but we do want to have this board consider the pre-purchase of some major equipment simply in the effort to both manage the funds and cost effectiveness much better, as well as to complete the projects by 2031, which is stipulated in the special legislation. So that candle is being burned at both ends as well as the middle, and we think there's going to be a need for some fast tracking type techniques to make all this happen. Also a very differentiating characteristic of phase 3 is there is a much, much more proactive process with SED, wherein there are many more required reviews of the projects. We have built-in time slots for those reviews. We need to meet with SED to make sure that they will, shall we say, concur and respect the fact that our financial plan, bond tranche sale, etc., are all predicated on the commissioner's approval date. And if we can't plan on and rely on that date, the financial plan likewise goes out the window. So it's an ask, but there ain't, to be blunt with you, a whole lot of room in terms of massaging that process and those types of milestones. We have built into the schedule for each of the 6 major projects at least 60 work days of SED review time. In phase 2, that was more like 10. On the big projects, 14. So you can see we're in a different world, a completely different world of engagement and interaction and having to work hand in glove with SED in the district. The third thing that we are very strident about trying to achieve is we don't see where there's the room to compete against ourselves in the slightest by having projects being bid close to each other. We've got to separate them, yet we also have to respect the fact that schools have a unique paradigm where the bulk of schoolwork is done over summers, and Labor Day, don't move. Schools have to open and be ready for that. So you have to work to certain constructs that are simply immovable. That ain't an easy process, as you can well imagine. We can do this with the minutia of detail that, illustrates the 300 some tasks that we have to date, or we can do it from a overview, which is the documents we've been using in work sessions, which are a little bit more reader friendly, to be honest with you, because the information is boiled down to a much simpler, digestible form. In that regard, as I said, we can kind of proceed either way. We will come back and address any questions anyone has after you've had the chance to internalize the memo that has been put together and will be distributed to all of the board members, as well as city and district stakeholders in this process. And I do want to be clear that although we have a skeleton staff of the moment, this has been a team effort where a lot of people have rolled up their sleeves. A lot of people have spent evenings and weekends, and this is an iterative process. We're giving you the best information we have to date. There are some big assumptions built in there, which I will come to at the conclusion of this overview of the schedule, if you will. So I think you get a taste from the document that's on the screen right now. We can get into a level of detail that you can't even read, to be honest with you, or we can do this from a higher overview perspective, which I think might be more suitable for the board, but it's also a much more informal working charrette type of document. So with that in mind, Kim, do you mind, can you pull up those? Yes, pull up the first one.
Detail one.
Page one, which is to say, it's really that wall there. The earlier versions are so marked up, you can't read them anymore. So this version has been cleaned up from a couple of weeks ago and up until last weekend. So we shall see. It ain't looking like what I was expecting. Okay, there we go with the first page of detail. And what you will see is in red are all the SED reviews that we have to accommodate. And those are actually periods of time. Whoa. I'm not that good and that fast. Okay. Well, okay. There gives you a sense, but that you can see in the block, in the spaces between all those blue boxes are SED reviews. The white box, that program verification, where we're going to have the AE teams go in and do their field verification, being certain that the boiler rooms, the size, the drawings, all of that kind of meshes with what we're telling them. But then we'll get into a schematic phase, which will really focus on the MEP infrastructure and getting a handle on how that's going to be integrated. We are required by the special legislation to make a 20%, 50%, 75%, and 90% submission to SED. Each one of those, we cannot exceed 95% of the allowable costs. So when the question was raised, how are we dealing with contingencies? Each submission has to substantiate that we are below the maximum cost allowance and that our base project is 95% or lower. That is a different kind of discipline, but that also means we will have some priority alternate, if you will, that can bring us up to 100% of the budget. But we have to demonstrate a base project that at no time exceeds 95% of the maximum cost allowance. So as you can see, those projects we are proposing start out pretty much together, but because of the complexity, Edison is an infrastructure as well as structural intense project, but Franklin is a total gut reconstruction. That's the biggest project proposed for phase 3. It will be the most time consuming, and you can see it takes the most time to both design and get through SED. But what's more important, as you can see by those green boxes, the bidding is staggered. We are not going to compete against ourselves. So contractors know if they're alive or not for the next project. They won't be deciding, well, this one actually looks a little better. We're not going to bid on the first project. We're going to wait for this project that's 3 weeks later. We're not going to put ourselves in that kind of predicament. And the other thing that needs to be noticed is underneath that last blue box, the 90% CD construction document. CD stands for construction document. That green bar right there is where we are asking authorization to go out with a mini bid and pre-purchase major MEP head-end equipment, so that manufacturing production time will actually start before we bid the balance of the project. Now, that puts that equipment in what's called an equipment by owner category. It's purchased before we know who the MEP contractors are. The owner gives them that equipment to install. It's already specified, it's coordinated in the drawings, but we've purchased it, which eliminates the markup of the contractors, but it's the risk of purchasing it early that we got SED, we got to get SED to play ball with us on. If we don't quite do that, these schedules become, in certain respects, untenable, because then we're at the vagaries of, Siemens looking at an airport in Dubai, or, what have you. So that is unusual for the school district. It's unusual for SED, but by no means is it unusual in the building and design and construction industry. So it's taking an entrepreneurial approach and a much more aggressive approach, but we will be asking for that authorization along with the early selection of AEs before the plan is formally approved. We know we're going to build the schools. We know we're going to proceed with the schools that have been approved by the district. We know kind of where their budgets are falling, and getting started has to occur to stay on the completion schedule for 2031. We are bumping right up to that window right now. But having said that, one of the things that this exercise has revealed to us is that if you look at Franklin and East, there is an overlap in the review process between Franklin and East. So we've built in float time, which is some flexibility in the schedule to allow, us to have more time to get that accomplished, but also not to inundate SED with two major projects at the same time. Without going through this kind of exercise where you build the project on paper before you actually have the contractors engaged, you can't quite anticipate those anomalies. But having done this, we are fairly certain that our assumptions built into this, as well as the aggressive but conservative approaches we take into time, the program is doable. If you could go to the next slide, Kim. This shows you that East would be on the heels of Wilson. Wilson would be the fifth project completed, and the last project completed in this slate is Douglas. Where we have the challenge is we can't get Wilson, which needs a swing space, in Franklin. If you could go back one slide for me, Kim, I'm sorry. We can't get those constructed at the same time without a second swing space suitable for high school, and the district is looking at candidates in that regard right now. When this plan was first put together and the schedules were first put together, there were two identified high school swing spaces, one of which has been taken off the table. Backfilling it now is a challenge we face. But without getting Wilson underway in the second year of the construction of Franklin, the whole program slides out 2 years in. If you go to 2 more slides, you will see right there that once we get, can you zoom more to the bottom? Because the swing space is far more important here. We will have Franklin, and Wilson will catch up with Franklin by that point in time. They'll both be completed at the same time. Then there's a choice between what school do you put Douglas in for swing space. But to get to that point, we need a second swing space. Now, if you go to the next slide, you will see that Douglas wraps up in June of 30, and that leaves 6 months for the final cost report program wide, and the other projects, the final cost reports will have been prepared well before then. And that's where we would be in terms of achieving the stipulated 2031 completion date. We're not trying to get cute and say 2031 June. 2031 is the target that we want to hit, and just be clear about it. But there are elements of proactive business-like procedures that we'd like this board to consider. And recapping again, it's the early selection of AE teams. Similarly, the construction manager pending the PLA. If there's a PLA, then this board has the option to go to a single prime, and you wouldn't need construction managers per se. But until that decision is made, we can't quite render an opinion on that. Then we have the other issue, not so much issue, we needed SED's concurrence on their review. Their reviews have to fit in these slots, because if they don't, which is what SED does with the other 730 districts across the state, you come in, once your project hits the loading dock, you're given a ticket number and you go online. Well, that won't quite work for this program. It hasn't in the past, and it can't, moving forward in phase 3. We need the concurrence on this board and SED on the pre-purchase of long lead items. Again, you can see we can't say these deadlines would be real if we're strung out waiting for boilers and generators. Finally, in terms of where we would be, I think we would have to have a upfront meeting with SED to review the schedule, to review where there is float, to review where we do have slotted review and milestone dates, and get their concurrence on that, along with their concurrence on exactly how the 95% will be determined. And finally, their concurrence on the gut renovations being eligible for furniture and the like. So that's a whirlwind overview. We do have a detailed schedule that can be provided to all of you. We'd like to sit down again with the district and go through it with a finer tooth comb. But we have been working very diligently, and we are very, very mindful of 2031 as just a hard stop.
And that concludes our program management report.
What we'll send to all of you is a document that we put together in the last couple of days here that describes the scheduling process, some of which, most of which, Raleigh's already talked about, and also how we use this schedule, because there is a master computerized schedule for the whole project now, including all of the individual projects and all of the things we can think about. It obviously will evolve dramatically through the form, but my position was, look, I know we got a lot of things we're not sure of right now, but we got to get something down here so we can gauge what those decisions, the impact of those decisions. And you see some of that right now. The fact that if we can't come to agreement with SED with respect to the time of review, this thing isn't going to get done in the time frame allowed. Same thing's true with respect to some of the with the fact that some of these projects bump into each other during this period of time, and they have an impact on it. But we now have a master computerized schedule that's already 10 or 12 large pages together. And so we now can begin to judge each of these impacts as they occur. And that's a major step for us.
That's what we call a live schedule. Is to say, if a date ain't real, it moves back, we can see its implications on the rest of the program. We will be making each of the construction managers use our master schedule. They have a copy. It's specific to their project. They have to update it every month with their pay recs to us, and we would look at and forecast whether or not everything's still in alignment with the overall program.
Yeah, but before we get to that point, we've got to have a master schedule here that works.
Right.
On a theoretical basis, at least. Because what I'm concerned about is that we make a bunch of decisions here And the reality of it is we're way off into, into 2032. Simply because we haven't kept track of it. So we need to, there are gonna be constraints on us and we need to know what they are and we need to have them factually run through the schedule. That's what these computerized construction schedules are intended to do. People use them all over the place and we're gonna use them here. So you'll get that material along with the other things we've shown you here to look at, but we're not asking you to act on it right now. We're just acting on it. Get to understand what's available to us and what we're thinking about. And as you can see from this conversation with Rolly, that we've already come to some conclusions about what's gonna have to be done here to make this thing work in the time frame allowed to.
I'll ask a couple of questions, one mentioning that we went from 14 days to 60 days. That's the review. How much of that just has to do with the fact that you noted, well, a lot of these are much bigger projects? So I mean,
Yeah, it's not-
you don't think it affects anything? Because I'm looking at, well, it's not gonna be a big project, you tell me I got 2 weeks to review it. I've got to get in design drawings and everything else. I'm looking to go. No, I want 2 months, not 2 weeks.
Which is why we will be constantly updating them through the life of the documents. They'll start at a 20% set of documents,
25.
which will 25%, my mistake. Which will likewise highlight anything that has significantly changed or matured. But I think what also needs to be understood here is the SED reviews mandate cost estimates at each one of these steps. So there's a detailed cost estimate that has to go in with it and show that you're at the 95% as well. Now, the ability to SED to dedicate staff, because if you look at this, it's not like every quarter there's not going to be 1 or 2 Rochester projects at SED. So we have to get them to have confidence that we have control over both the quality, the scope, and the schedule, and the estimating, and that the review that they do is for code conformance and life safety primarily.
Okay.
And that's the way we have to handle it.
One of the reasons for, as you know, one of the reasons for doing all this work on this schedule and getting this significant detail in place now is these decisions have consequences. And I don't, if they can't do this, if it's gonna take, twice as long, there's gonna be a consequence. And that consequence has something to do with how soon we get this done, but it also has a cost consequence. And, so the discussion we need to have here is it needs to be as factually based as possible with respect to this schedule that we're talking about.
But the other point, Rich, in terms of your question, the early projects, to be honest with you, need to be delegated to what we call, I used to be school architects that know schools, know SED, and know the codes and what you have to supply them to reach their level of comfort and confidence. And as such, what's going to be different, I think, in the AE contracts with phase 3 is not only are the AE teams going to have to do estimating throughout the project, along with the CM and all the reconciliations that come along with it, they are not going to be afforded the luxury to stop work. So when they make a submittal, they say it's 95%. We're saying you're confident it's 95%. You continue with your work while SED reviews it, because we can't have you stop and all of a sudden your project architect is assigned to another project and we get some junior person because that's who's the next batter up. So there's, as the chair was just saying, there are real consequences to not agreeing to the master schedule by both the district as well as SED and each of our consulting teams.
So it sounds like though they're pretty much asking for things at 25%. That's pretty much your PD, right? Your preliminary design. Usually that's about 30%.
Right.
And what'd you say? The next one was 50, 75, and 95?
Yes, 50, 75, and 90.
90,
75 is usually your final design, and 95 would be your.
your permit,
specification.
yes, exactly.
So that's 50, but I understand that. I guess I'm just looking at it and saying, from that schedule, and I like keeping it moving. So I think, it's fine with that. I think those 60 days should be sufficient. Know that we get everything on board and say, if you know, any, drop in that is gonna set back the schedule. Obviously, you're using Primavera or whatever it is gonna
Yep.
automatically update once we miss one day, it's gonna set other things back. And just, there's that ripple effect, which is what we need to see on. I'm okay with that. The question I had was, also too, kind of that same point of having the same people working on the jobs. Are there any opportunities here? I mean, I know these are big projects, but have we thought about bundling? Or are they just too big? In other words, if you're gonna be doing a lot of MEP or HVAC work, I don't know, in Edison or East and Wilson, you start to put some of those together, or is there any chance to bundle them? So you have the same laborers working on two sites, but they're effectively doing the same work. And I wanna pause at that point to say, I love the idea of giving the pre-orders. We're saying like 60 months on some of the more, I'll call it custom items that we have 5 years, we're being told 5 years on certain things. And you're right, for the MEP, the switches and everything else have been really, really tough on the electrical side, so. But has any been thought, in transportation, we've always done. PennDOT down in Pennsylvania, we did, 16, 20, 30 bridges and say, well, they're all simple spans. They're different lengths and you need to have different, we can just cut them, drop them off, and it's the same team literally follows it down the track. So I don't know if there's that opportunity or not, but at least it gets us a dedicated workforce. We're more than one project at a time, and there may be some synergies.
We'll have to,
In Edison is doing it in the moment.
it might, we'll have to think about it. What threw us off in the past was the starting points were different. Because you're doing the renovation of the schools. And so everyone starts out differently because they're built at different times at different circumstances. But farther into the project, or maybe with respect to the HVAC work, maybe that's not so true, when you actually look at it. So that's something to think about, yeah.
That's implicit in the notion of pre-purchasing head-end equipment that you'd essentially be standardizing.
Yeah.
But the problem with bundling trades across schools, different schools, is the whole cost coding and project control numbers and financial reporting
So
that is endemic and has to be locked in to each school and is reported and progressed that way.
First time paperwork wins, but okay.
that's true. And also about 5 years ago, we discussed the idea of program-wide projects with SED, and that was rejected.
The other thing with the trades that I would just add is I saw I'm talking about PLA, makes sense that Sealer would do it, they're doing it. But I'm just curious, because we do have representatives elsewhere that I would sit here and say, how are, just start thinking about maybe for the next board meeting. I'd like to talk about the PLAs because I'm having concerns across the board on these, because the trades will come in and say, we want X number for $1. Well, that's great, but how many people have you trained up? How many apprentices do you have in the pipeline, right? Because the issue is, there's a $1.4 billion stadium being built to the west. There's a $2.3 billion interstate coming down to the east. We haven't started $500 million on the Kensington and Buffalo for what they're going to do with that at Micron. And now we're coming in and saying, hey, here's $500 million and we want to have a PLA. But I keep saying, okay, but who's trained up and ready to go? Because you can't just use fixed percentages. People, you have, building it up. I mean, it's that old Bureau of Labor Statistics point that they made probably a year or so ago. Pre-COVID, number of individuals 25 and younger in the construction industry outnumbered those 55 and older. Now it's flipped around. And you start going a couple more years, those 55 and olders are going down. You don't just become a heavy equipment operator overnight. You have to take time to get up there. So
We have
I just,
and
not knowing realistic expectations since we got kind of.
well, and you're right about that. And also, this is a prevailing wage job, so you're not really talking about how much you're paying them. And the access to labor is certainly gonna be an issue. We're gonna have to deal with, and there's maybe nothing they can do, they can't deliver. So, it doesn't matter what they promise you. I'm hopeful that in the past, we've been able to get some help from them, and we'll see about it. With respect to the MBE requirements, in the old days, it was, we don't have anybody, so that's the end of the conversation. It relates very much to the number of apprentices and the training they're doing, because that's where that opportunity is probably best. So we'll see if we can you know, we can get something out of that, but it's a different set of circumstances than have been in the past. The one thing we have to think about a little bit is, and again, we've never really had an issue with it. Because of the way our schedule is so tight and because of getting the kids into the school on a schedule, you know, where it's actually tighter than it looks, you know, because of what a consequence of being a month late would be here. We can't take a strike. Because if, you know, if they stop the thing for 2 weeks, we'd be in trouble because where would we put these kids? So that's something is a little important. Well, okay, we got, what we'll do is we'll send you guys the material here that we've reviewed here today. We did it this way, maybe because we thought that it would mean more to you if we had an explanation before we just sent you all these pages of charts and numbers. But the good news is, with respect to what we've just demonstrated, I hope, is one, we do have a master schedule for the whole project now. And with considerable detail. So we're dealing here now with a very significant, you know, tool with respect to planning going forward. And we do have the same with a little less detail with respect to the total project cost. So we've got two elements that we now have a basis which to work from, you know, as we work our way through these, through the problems. There are always going to be problems. We gotta, you know, put a stake in the ground and work off of it, which we will do, Anything else to come before our assembled group here?
Chairman Richards, I have a quick question, and it kind of centers around what Richard was talking about. Do we have an idea what the long lead items, what that number might be, 10%, 50% of the total cost? I've actually been in situations like that where if we built a plant in Holland, $140 million, we had some equipment built in Minnesota, we got it over there, and it cost us another $15 million to retrofit it because the system wasn't spec'd out properly. So I assume I heard earlier that we're talking a lot about electrical and plumbing, and you know, a lot of the renovations are going to be focused around that. I mean, do we have a rough idea of what that cost is going to be, and you know, how do we adjust if we get a 100,000 BTU unit sent in, it's built in a year, it gets in, and we find out we need another 30,000 BTUs, you know, for that?
I think the answer to that is we don't have an answer for your question right now. That's particularly valuable. In other words, that's based on a concrete enough number. But that's the reason we want to get the architectural engineering people at work sooner. Remember we talked about that?
Right.
So that we can get some of this stuff spec'd out early, and then have an answer to that question, which we're going to have an answer for with respect to this. But it's pretty substantial. I know that it's a pretty substantial portion. Worth our work, you know, to get it clear. I'm hopeful that the HVAC system in the schools is not as complicated as it was in the Xerox plant. So that once we get some standard kind of decisions made with respect to it here, that we'll have more confidence in it, because the functioning that we're asking it to do, what we're asking to do is pretty conventional functioning, you know, it's heating and cooling.
Right. Yeah.
So we're hopeful that'll be,
Thank you.
you know, less of a pressure on us, but.
We would hope that instead of a traditional schematic design process, that schematic design will focus on the MEP infrastructure and getting a more detailed cost for that earlier. We are building cost models now. We're taking the strategic plan cost and actually trying to filter out the big ticket items such as the MEP head-end equipment. But the schematics will, in certain respects, work backwards. Ordinarily, the architect kind of drives the schematics by what you're trying to do with the spaces. These projects are going to be driven by what we have to do with the infrastructure, and thus having a clearer picture of not just the size of the boiler or the switchgear, but how are you going to distribute it in that building? And, you know, forcing that thinking earlier and that pricing earlier is how we hope to better control the cost and eliminate surprises. But it is going to be very challenging. It's going to be challenging.
And the primary goal is to do a forced standardization with the pre-purchase. And also, we're having a lot of issues with switch gears and switchboard orders, because in Yonkers, New York City, and Long Island, we have switchboards that were ordered a year and a half ago, and people are still waiting for them because of copper products are so scarce. So I think that's the idea, to see if we can get ahead of it and not have a problem once designed.
Yeah, I mean, one of the choices here are not all, well, that's what we want, we'll have to wait. I mean, we may have to change what we want here.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's gonna have to be some push and shove on both sides of this, in order to meet the current circumstances. And the biggest problem is distributing, because these are old buildings, some of them are quite old, you know, they're the idea of cooling a building that old is tricky, to say the least. And we've had to struggle with that, you know, a couple places. Well, okay, folks, I can tell by looking around the room, you've had all of what you want to have here for one day. Guess I can't blame you for that. Anything else? Hearing nothing else, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a happy holiday season, everyone.
Happy
Yeah.
holidays.
Thank you. Yep. Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for the gravitas, Rolly.
Travis. Must be Travis.
Happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you. So